The silence in the lavish dining room of the Harrison estate was heavier than the crystal chandelier hanging above us. Everyone's eyes were fixed on me as Richard's father leaned forward, his gold cufflinks catching the light as he rested his elbows on the imported mahogany table. "So, Cassandra," he said with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes, "tell us again about your little craft project." Behind me, I could hear my husband shifting uncomfortably in his chair, but he said nothing, not a word in my defense. And in that moment, as I sat surrounded by old money and older judgments, I clutched my water glass and thought about the papers sitting in my briefcase in the car. The deed to the very mansion we were sitting in now, signed in my name. The Sunday brunches at the Harrison estate had always been an exercise in restraint. For 5 years I'd endured them monthly. The subtle digs, the condescending questions, the way they spoke about my veteran rehabilitation program as if it were a cute hobby rather than a legitimate business. But today was different. Today, I knew something they didn't. "It's not a craft project, Douglas," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Veterans Rebuild is a full-service contracting company. We've completed 16 major commercial renovations in the past year alone." Douglas Harrison Sr. chuckled, exchanging glances with his daughter Vivian. 16? Well, that's certainly ambitious for someone with no background in construction. "I was a combat engineer for 8 years, I reminded him, not for the first time. "I rebuilt infrastructure in war zones." Yes. Douglas waved his hand dismissively. "But the real estate market is a different battlefield entirely. One that requires connections, capital, legacy." He emphasized the last word while glancing at my husband Richard, his middle son, and the family's designated underachiever according to their standards. "Speaking of real estate," Vivian interjected, casually swirling her mimosa, "have you heard Parker's firm just acquired that downtown development? $50 million project." She beamed at her husband, the golden son-in-law who'd been welcomed into the fold with trust funds and partnership offers from day one. Parker nodded, straightening his posture. "Breaking ground next month. Biggest commercial deal in the city. This year. Now that's a real business," Douglas Sr. said, raising his glass. "To legacy projects that matter." Everyone clinked glasses. Even Richard, beside me, raised his in silent agreement. I sipped my water, counting backwards from 10 in my head, a technique I'd learned in the military to keep my cool under pressure. "Cassandra was just telling me about her latest project," Claire, Douglas's wife, said, with a smile that seemed almost genuine. In the hierarchy of Harrison contempt, she had always been the least offensive. "Something about helping those poor veterans fix up houses?" "We don't just fix up houses," I explained, setting down my glass. "We provide skills training, employment, and housing solutions for veterans transitioning to civilian life. Our latest contract is a complete restoration of a historical property." "How charitable," Vivian murmured, not quite under her breath. "It's not charity," I corrected. "It's a sustainable business model. Our team delivers premium work, on time and under budget. And I'm sure the tax breaks for hiring veterans don't hurt," Parker added with a wink. Richard cleared his throat finally. "Cass is actually doing quite well with it." His lukewarm defense hung in the air, perhaps worse than silence. Douglas Sr. paused, fork midway to his mouth. "Is she now? And how would you define quite well, Richard? Breaking even? Making enough? To contribute to your household expenses?" The way he said it, as though anything I earned was supplementary pin money while the real financial responsibility belonged to my husband, made my jaw clench. The fact that I'd been the primary breadwinner since Richard's startup had failed 2 years ago was conveniently overlooked at these family gatherings. "Actually," Richard started, but I placed my hand on his arm. "Veterans Rebuild grossed $4.2 million last year," I said simply. For a brief moment, silence reigned. Then Douglas Sr. coughed. Gross revenue is meaningless without context, Cassandra. After expenses, payroll, insurance, especially in construction, margins are razor thin. I'm sure you're learning that the hard way. I learned about margin management while keeping my unit supplied in Afghanistan with half the requisitioned materials, I replied evenly. We've maintained a 22% profit margin since our second year of operation. Vivian's husband, Parker, snorted. Come on, no small construction outfit pulls 22% in this market. That's fantasy math. Veterans have discipline, I shrugged. We work efficiently, and clients are willing to pay premium rates for quality and reliability. Claire tilted her head. That's wonderful that you're providing opportunities for those people, dear. Though I wonder if it's sustainable. These fads for supporting veterans come and go with election cycles. Those people, I repeated, the words hanging in the air between us. You know what she means, Douglas Sr. interjected, waving his hand. No offense intended. Of course not, I agreed, the familiar weight of their collective dismissal settling on my shoulders. The conversation shifted then to the real estate market, stock portfolios, and the upcoming charity gala that the Harrisons chaired each year, their version of giving back, which seemed to involve spending enormous sums on designer gowns and silent auction items to impress other wealthy families. As brunch wound down, Douglas Sr. stood, touching his napkin to his lips before making an announcement. Before everyone leaves, I have some family business to discuss. Richard, perhaps you and Parker could join me in the study? There's the matter of the Westridge property to settle. Richard straightened beside me. The Westridge property, the Harrison family's crown jewel, a sprawling waterfront estate that had been in the family for generations. Douglas Sr. had been hinting for months that he was ready to turn over management of it to the next generation. Vivian, too, of course, Douglas added, almost as an afterthought. What about Cassandra? Richard asked, surprising me with his sudden backbone. Douglas Sr. chuckled. This is Harrison family business, son. I'm sure Cassandra understands. I did understand. 5 years of marriage to Richard hadn't made me a true Harrison in their eyes. I was still the outsider, the girl from nowhere special who'd served her country instead of attending an Ivy League school, who built things with her hands instead of moving money through accounts. I'll wait here, I offered, making it easy for Richard. He hesitated, then nodded, squeezing my shoulder as he followed his father, sister, and brother-in-law down the hall toward the imposing double doors of the study. Claire began directing the staff to clear the table, her practiced smile, never wavering. More coffee, Cassandra? This might take a while. The men do love to talk business. No, thank you, I replied, rising from my chair. Actually, I think I'll step outside for some air. Of course, she nodded, already turning her attention to adjusting a flower arrangement that looked perfectly fine to me. Outside on the veranda, I breathed in the crisp autumn air, looking out over the manicured gardens of the estate. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Marcus, my operations manager. All set for tomorrow. Documents received, team on standby. I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation before slipping the phone away. Tomorrow would change everything, but not in the way the Harrisons expected. 20 minutes later, the study doors opened. I'd returned to the sitting room, declining Claire's offer of a fashion magazine in favor of reviewing blueprints on my tablet. The voices drifted down the hallway, animated, pleased, congratulatory. Richard entered first, his face flushed with excitement. Cass, you won't believe it. Dad's naming me and Parker co-trustees of Westridge. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely happy for him. Despite everything, Richard deserved this recognition from his father. Douglas Sr. followed, looking satisfied with himself. It's time to start passing the torch. The Westridge estate is the cornerstone of our family legacy. 7 acres, the main house, the guest cottages. Been in the Harrison name since 1932. And it will stay that way. Parker added pointedly, glancing at me. Of course, I agreed pleasantly. Family legacies are important. We're thinking of some significant renovations, Vivian chimed in. The East Wing is practically falling apart, and the boathouse needs to be completely rebuilt. Perhaps Cassandra's little company could bid on it, Douglas Sr. said with a magnanimous smile that didn't reach his eyes. We should support family enterprises when we can, even the unconventional ones. Richard looked at me hopefully. That would be perfect, wouldn't it? You've been wanting to show them what Veterans Rebuild can do. I felt a twinge of guilt at his earnestness. Richard wasn't a bad man, just one who'd never fully emerged from his father's shadow, who still craved approval from people who measured worth in generations and trust funds. Actually, I said carefully, I think there might be a conflict of interest. Douglas Sr. raised an eyebrow. A conflict? How so? I took a deep breath. This wasn't how I'd planned to do this, but something about Vivian's smug smile and Douglas's condescending tone pushed me past my carefully laid plans. I have a previous commitment regarding Westridge, I said, meeting Douglas Sr.'s gaze directly. Parker laughed. What? Did you already order the lumber? I think you're getting ahead of yourself, Cassandra. No, I replied evenly. I'm referring to my meeting tomorrow with the current owner. The room went still. Douglas Sr.'s expression hardened. I am the current owner. I shook my head slowly. Not according to the county records. Westridge was transferred to Oceanic Holdings 3 months ago. The paperwork was finalized last week. That's impossible, Douglas snapped. Oceanic is my holding company. I would know if Oceanic was your holding company, I corrected gently. Until the merger with Blackstone, partners in July. I believe your CFO handled the details while you were in Europe. Douglas's face had gone from flushed to ashen. Blackstone, but that would mean… James Whitley is now the primary stakeholder, I confirmed, and as of yesterday, he's agreed to sell Westridge to me. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Claire, usually determined to smooth over any awkwardness, stood frozen with a coffee pot in her hand. This is absurd, Parker finally sputtered. You can't possibly have the capital to purchase Westridge. It's worth $17 million as of the last appraisal, I finished for him. Though James agreed to 14 given the condition of the East Wing and boathouse. Douglas Sr. seemed to have recovered his composure, a dangerous glint in his eye. This is some kind of joke, or a negotiation tactic. Either way, it's in extremely poor taste, Cassandra. It's neither, I replied, reaching for my bag and withdrawing a folder. These are copies of the preliminary transfer documents. The final closing is scheduled for noon tomorrow. Richard took the folder with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the legal terminology before finding the purchase price and the signatures, James Whitley's and mine. How? He whispered, looking up at me with wide eyes. How could you possibly afford this? Before I could answer, Douglas Sr. snatched the papers from his son's hands. This is a mistake, a clerical error, or worse, fraud. I'll have my attorneys… Your attorneys already reviewed the Blackstone merger, I interrupted gently. The clause regarding property divestment was on page 342. It's not my fault no one read the fine print. Douglas's knuckles whitened around the papers. And I suppose you just happened to notice this fine print? Just happened to be in a position to purchase a $17 million estate? Not happened, I corrected. I've been tracking Blackstone's acquisitions for over a year. When I saw they'd absorbed Oceanic, I reached out to James directly. We served together in Afghanistan before he went into finance. Vivian made a strangled sound. This is theft. You've manipulated your way into our family property. Actually, I said quietly, it's business. The kind with connections, capital, and legacy. The kind you all thought I could never understand. I turned to Richard, whose face had gone completely blank. I'm sorry you're finding out this way, I wanted to tell you privately, but you let us sit here and patronize you, Claire said, surprising everyone. While you knew all along you were buying our home out from under us. Not your home, I pointed out. Your vacation property, one of many. One that's been neglected for years because no one here actually cares about building or preserving anything real. Douglas Sr. had recovered enough to shift into threatening mode. This will never stand. I have resources you can't imagine. By tomorrow, I cut in. Veterans Rebuild will officially own this property, and we have plans for it. What plans? Richard finally asked, his voice hollow. I softened my tone. We're converting it into a training center and transitional housing complex for veterans. The main house will become classrooms and administrative offices. The cottages will house veterans and their families while they complete the program. You're turning Westridge into some kind of halfway house? Vivian gasped, clutching her pearls so literally I almost laughed. We're turning it into something useful, I corrected. Something that changes lives instead of just sitting empty 50 weeks a year while you all debate whether the East Wing should be colonial revival or Georgian. Douglas Sr. slammed the papers down on the table. Richard, he said sharply, did you know about this? Is this some kind of revenge plot you two cooked up? Richard looked as shocked as the rest of them. I had no idea, he said quietly, staring at me like he'd never seen me before. This doesn't have to be adversarial, I offered, looking around at their stunned faces. Veterans Rebuild would welcome Harrison Developments as a corporate sponsor. We could co-brand the training center. Parker actually laughed, a harsh barking sound. You must be joking. You expect us to fund your hostile takeover? I expect nothing, I replied. But I'm offering an opportunity to be part of something meaningful, something that honors what Westridge could be, rather than what it has become. Get out, Douglas Sr. said quietly, dangerously. Both of you. Now. Richard stood mechanically, still staring at the papers on the table. Dad, maybe we should… Not another word. His father cut him off. I don't know what kind of woman you've married, but she is no longer welcome in this house. And if you side with her on this, neither are you. I gathered my things calmly, though my heart was racing. This wasn't how I'd wanted things to play out, but perhaps it was inevitable. 5 years of subtle dismissal and condescension had culminated in this moment of truth. For what it's worth, I said, pausing at the door. Everything I said about Veterans Rebuild was true. We did gross $4.2 million last year. We do maintain a 22% profit margin. And we are changing lives. The lives of people who've sacrificed everything for others, only to come home and find there's no place for them. Save your speeches, Vivian spat. We know what this is. Revenge, pure and simple. I shook my head. No, this is purpose. Something none of you would recognize if it knocked on your door, which, ironically, it just did. Richard followed me out in silence, neither of us speaking until we reached our car at the end of the circular driveway. As I clicked the key fob, he finally turned to me. How long have you been planning this? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. The opportunity presented itself 3 months ago, I answered honestly. The decision took me about 30 seconds. He nodded slowly, processing. $14 million, Cass. Were you ever going to tell me? I met his gaze directly. Yes. Tonight, actually, I wanted you to hear it from me. Not as some kind of power play in front of your family. Yet that's exactly what happened. Your father pushed, I said simply. Richard stared at me for a long moment before opening the passenger door. I don't know if I believe that. We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, the tension between us thickening with each passing mile. Richard stared out the window, his reflection in the glass showing a man I barely recognized, jaw tight, eyes distant, lost in thought or perhaps lost altogether. How did you do it? He finally asked, still looking away from me. $14 million. Even with the business doing well, It wasn't just Veterans Rebuild, I admitted, keeping my eyes on the road. Remember my deployment bonus? The one we were going to use for a down payment on that house in Oak Ridge? He turned to me. The one you insisted we invest instead. I nodded. I put it into a tech startup founded by another veteran, Soul Tech. Recognition dawned slowly on his face. The solar panel company that went public last year? That was a 200-fold return. 300, actually. I was an early angel investor. I signaled for our exit, the familiar route home suddenly feeling like uncharted territory. Between that, the business profits, and a consortium investment from other veteran-owned businesses, we had the capital. Richard fell silent again, processing this information. When he spoke next, his voice was barely audible. You never told me about Soltech. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I did, 3 times. You said it sounded risky and changed the subject to your father's latest real estate venture. That's not fair, Cass. Maybe not, I conceded. But it's true. After the 3rd time. I stopped bringing it up, just like I stopped talking about Veterans Rebuild's growth potential, or our expansion plans, or anything else that your family might label a hobby or charity case. We pulled into our driveway, a modest colonial, in a good neighborhood, nothing like the Harrison Estates, but comfortable in ours. Richard made no move to get out of the car. Were you ever going to tell me about any of this? He asked, hurt edging his voice. I turned off the engine and finally looked at him directly. I was going to tell you everything tonight, about Westridge, about the training center plans, about the financial structure, everything. But not before you'd already made the decision. Not before you'd signed papers to buy my family's property. Our property, I corrected. And yes, I made the decision independently because every time I've tried to include you in business decisions, you've deferred to your father's opinions. Richard flinched as if I'd slapped him. In a way, I had. The truth between us had been building, for years, like a wall brick by brick, and now I was finally acknowledging its existence. That's not true, he protested, but it lacked conviction. 2 years ago, I reminded him gently, when Veterans Rebuild won the Middleton contract, the one that put us on the map commercially, I wanted to use the profits to expand our facilities. You insisted we invested in your father's Riverside development instead. That was a sound business decision. Riverside doubled our investment. It was your father's decision, I said. And yes, we made money, but we lost 6 months of growth potential. We could have hired 15 more veterans, taken on 3 more major projects. Richard's face hardened. So this is punishment. For not believing in your business enough. I shook my head, suddenly weary. No, Rich. This is me finally trusting my own judgment without seeking approval from people who've never respected what I'm building. Including me? The hurt in his voice was real. I don't know, I admitted. That's what I need to figure out. He reached for the door handle, then paused. What happens now, with Westridge? The closing is tomorrow at noon. By tomorrow evening, Veterans Rebuild will officially own the property. By next month, we'll start renovations. By spring, we'll open the training center. And what about us? His voice was quiet, almost lost in the stillness of the car. I hadn't allowed myself to think beyond tomorrow's closing. Beyond the moment when I would reclaim not just a piece of property, but pieces of myself that had been slowly chipped away by years of Sunday brunches and condescending smiles. That depends, I said finally, on whether you can see me, really see me, without your father's eyes. He didn't respond. Instead, he got out of the car and walked toward the house, shoulders slumped in a way that made him look more like the uncertain boy I'd met 8 years ago than the man I'd married. I remained sitting in the car, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. This wasn't victory. It didn't taste like sweet revenge or triumphant vindication. It tasted like truth. bitter and cleansing all at once. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Whitley confirmed. For noon. Legal team ready. This is really happening, boss. Yes, I thought, gathering my bag and finally stepping out of the car. This is really happening. Not just the purchase of Westridge, but the unraveling of carefully constructed pretenses that had defined my marriage for too long. Inside, Richard was already pouring himself a scotch. His father's brand, I noted with a sad irony. He didn't offer me one. I need to call my father, he said without looking at me. Because he told you to? Or because you want to? He finally met my gaze, conflict evident in his eyes. Because regardless of what you think of him, he's still my father. And you just bought his ancestral home out from under him. To be fair, he lost his ancestral home when he failed to read the merger agreement his CFO signed. I just happened to be the buyer. That's semantics, Cass. It doesn't change how this looks. And how does it look? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Richard took a long swallow of his drink before answering. Like you deliberately humiliated my entire family to prove a point. The humiliation was collateral damage, not the goal, I said quietly. And if that's all you see in what happened today, then you've been living in your father's reality even longer than I thought. What is that supposed to mean? I set my bag down and moved to the kitchen, suddenly needing to occupy my hands with something mundane and normal. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and reached for a mug. It means that for 5 years, I've watched you try to earn your father's respect by diminishing my accomplishments, by treating my business as less important than his opinion, by sitting silently while he and Vivian and Parker made it clear that I would never be good enough because I wasn't born into the right family or didn't attend the right schools. That's not fair, Richard protested. I've always supported you. Have you? I turned to face him, leaning against the counter. When was the last time you defended my business decisions to your father? When was the last time you corrected him when he called Veterans Rebuild my little project? When was the last time you were proud of what I've built instead of apologetic about it? The kettle whistled, sharp and insistent like the truth forcing its way between us. I turned to silence it, pouring the steaming water over the teabag with steady hands that belied my inner turmoil. Richard set his glass down hard. That's rich, coming from someone who just engineered a massive business deal behind my back. It wasn't behind your back, I replied evenly. It was separate from you. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, my wife just orchestrated the purchase of my family's estate without so much as a heads up, until she decided to drop the bomb in the middle of Sunday brunch. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth spread through, me steadying my nerves. Would you have supported it if I had told you? Would you have stood with me against your father's inevitable rage? Or would you have tried to talk me out of it, to protect the family peace at the expense of my business goals? His silence was more telling than any words could have been. That's what I thought, I said softly, and that's why I made this decision on my own. Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression tightening. It's my father. Are you going to answer it? He stared at the phone for another moment before silencing it and placing it face down on the counter. Not yet. It was a small gesture, but significant. For the first time in our marriage, Richard was choosing the space between us over his father's immediate demands. It wasn't enough to undo years of pattern, but it was something. I need you to understand something, I said, setting my mug down. Veterans Rebuild isn't just a business to me. It's not about profit margins or tax breaks, or even proving something to your family. It's about the men and women I served with, people who gave everything for this country and came home to find nobody had saved a place for them. I know that, Richard said, but I shook my head. No, you don't. Because if you did, you would have been proud to tell your father about our growth last year instead of trying to change the subject. You would have seen Westridge for what it could be rather than what it represented to the Harrison legacy. He was quiet for a moment. Maybe you're right, he admitted finally. Maybe I have been seeing things through his eyes for too long. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I'd ever heard from him, and it loosened something tight in my chest. The worst part, I continued, softer now, is that I think your father knows exactly how capable I am. That's why he's worked so hard to diminish me. Because people like Douglas Harrison Sr. don't fear failure. They fear being outshone by someone they deemed unworthy. Richard looked up sharply. Is that what you think? That my father is threatened by you? I think. Your father recognized long ago that I wasn't going to play by his rules. That I wasn't going to be the grateful, deferential daughter-in-law who knew her place. And that made me dangerous. His phone buzzed again, insistent. This time, Richard didn't even look at it. What are you going to do with Westridge, really? He asked instead. I took a deep breath. Exactly what I said. Convert the main house into classrooms, administrative offices, and workshop spaces. Transform the East Wing into a technology training center. Use the cottages as transitional housing for veterans and their families while they complete the program. And the boathouse? Boat building, I said with a small smile. Traditional wooden boat restoration as occupational therapy and technical training. We've got 3 master boat builders already committed to the program. Despite himself, Richard looked impressed. You've really thought this through. I've been planning this kind of training center for 2 years, I explained. Not specifically at Westridge, but somewhere that would offer the space and facilities we need. When the opportunity arose, I knew immediately it was perfect. And you can afford not just to buy it, but to run it? I nodded. The Soltech investment provided the capital for purchase. Our existing contracts and a new federal grant will fund the renovations and operations. Plus, once we're up and running, the restoration projects themselves will generate revenue. Richard's phone buzzed a 3rd time. He glanced at it, then back, at me. He's not going to stop. No, I agreed. He's not. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Before he could answer, a car pulled into our driveway, headlights sweeping across the kitchen windows. Richard moved to look out. It's Vivian, he said, surprise evident in his voice. And Parker. I set my mug down with deliberate calm. Your father sent reinforcements. Richard ran a hand through his hair. I should talk to them alone. No, I said firmly. Not in our home. If they want to talk, they talk to both of us. The doorbell rang, shrill and demanding. Richard hesitated, looking at me with uncertainty that bordered on fear. I realized with sudden clarity that he'd never truly stood up to his family, not even in small ways. He'd developed 1,000 strategies for appeasement and avoidance, but never direct confrontation. Together, I said, moving to stand beside him. Or not at all. He nodded once, a quick jerk of his head, and we walked to the door. When we opened it, Vivian was already mid-sentence, as though she'd been rehearsing her speech during the entire drive. Absolutely insane, Richard. Father is beside himself. You need to talk some sense into your wife before... She stopped abruptly, registering my presence beside him. Oh, you're here. I live here, I replied evenly. Would you like to come in? Parker stepped forward, all business in his tailored suit. This isn't a social call, Cassandra. We're here to discuss the Westridge situation. I assumed as much, I said, stepping back to allow them entry. Can I offer you something to drink, tea, coffee? The morning of the closing dawned unseasonably bright, sunlight streaming through our bedroom windows as though nature itself was celebrating. Richard was already up, his side of the bed empty when I opened my eyes. I found him in the kitchen, coffee brewing, dressed in a suit I hadn't seen him wear since his startup's last investor meeting. You're really coming, I said, more statement than question. He nodded, sliding a mug across the counter to me. I am. Your father will be there. I know. With lawyers. I assumed as much. Richard's mouth quirked in a small, tight smile. He texted me 14 times last night, called 7, then sent a formal email at 2 a.m. outlining the ways I was betraying the Harrison legacy. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. And I didn't respond to any of it. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I'm done being the son he wants instead of the man I need to be. Those words, simple, direct, hit me with unexpected force. I'd spent so long watching Richard twist himself into shapes that pleased his father that I'd almost forgotten what he looked like standing straight. What changed? I asked softly. He considered the question, taking his time. Last night, after Vivian and Parker left, I sat up thinking about what you said, about seeing things through my father's eyes. And I realized you were right. I've been so busy trying to earn his approval that I missed the most important thing, right in front of me. What's that? You, he said simply. What you've built, who you are. I was so conditioned to measure success by my father's standards that I couldn't see that what you've created is worth more than all his developments combined. I set my mug down carefully, not trusting my suddenly unsteady hands. Rich, let me finish, he interrupted gently. When you told my father about Veterans Rebuild's revenue, do you know what I felt? I shook my head. Pride, he said, and shame. Pride in what you've accomplished, and shame that I've never properly acknowledged it. That I've let my father's dismissal become my own. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Richard looked different somehow. Not just the suit or the earlier rising, but something in his posture, his eyes. Like someone who had finally put down a heavy weight they'd been carrying too long. I don't know if I can fix what I've broken between us, he continued. But I do know I won't miss being there today when you sign those papers. When you turn my family's symbol of status into something that actually matters. I wanted to reach. For him, but held back, too many years of disappointment making me cautious. Why should I believe this time is different? He didn't flinch from the question. You shouldn't, he acknowledged. Not yet. I've given you no reason to trust that I won't fold under pressure. But today is a start. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. Boss, we might have a situation, he said when I answered. Whitley just called. Douglas Harrison showed up at his office an hour ago. My stomach tightened. And he's trying to block the sale, claiming some technicality about the merger agreement. Whitley doesn't think it'll stick, but it could delay things. I glanced at Richard, who was watching me intently. How long a delay? Hard to say. Harrison's threatening an injunction. Whitley's legal team is reviewing now, but they recommend we proceed as planned. Show up, be ready to sign. They'll update us if anything changes. We'll be there, I confirmed before hanging up. Richard raised an eyebrow. My father? Your father, I confirmed, trying to block the sale through legal channels. Will it work? I shrugged, projecting more confidence than I felt. Doubtful. The sale is legitimate. He's just trying to buy time. Richard's jaw tightened. Time for what? To find another angle, to pressure Whitley, to convince himself he's still in control. I drained my coffee and set the mug in the sink. We should get going. Traffic will be heavy. 40 minutes later, we pulled into the parking garage adjacent to Whitley's downtown office. Richard had been quiet during the drive, his thoughts clearly churning behind his carefully composed expression. As I shifted into park, he finally spoke. Tell me about James Whitley. How do you know him? I unbuckled my seatbelt, turning to face him. We served in the same unit for a while. He was logistics, I was engineering. There was an ambush outside Kandahar. Our convoy hit an IED, 3 vehicles destroyed, 5 casualties. Richard listened intently. These were details I rarely shared, fragments of a life he'd only glimpsed through the sanitized stories I brought home. James pulled 2 men from a burning Humvee that day, I continued. I stabilized the road so medevac could get through. After, we kept in touch. When he left the service, he went into finance. When I started Veterans Rebuild, he was one of our first supporters. And now he's selling you Westridge. Business is about relationships, I said, echoing the phrase Douglas had used so often at his Sunday brunches. Just not the kind your father values. We rode the elevator to the 37th floor in silence. When the doors opened, a sleek reception area greeted us, all glass and chrome and understated wealth. The receptionist looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. Ms. Matthews, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Whitley is expecting you in the main conference room. She led us down a hallway lined with abstract art, each piece likely worth more than our modest colonial. At the end stood a set of double doors, which she opened with practiced efficiency. Inside, several people were already seated around a massive table. James Whitley rose immediately, his tall frame imposing even in civilian clothes. Time had added silver to his temples since Afghanistan, but his handshake was still military firm. Cassandra. He greeted me warmly before turning to Richard. And you must be the husband, James Whitley. Richard Harrison, my husband replied, shaking James's hand. I appreciate you meeting with us despite my father's intervention. James's expression remained neutral. Yes, well, your father made quite an impression this morning, not his first. Attempt to strong-arm me, I suspect. Nor his last, Richard acknowledged. Mr. Whitley? A woman in a crisp suit interrupted. We should begin. The Harrison legal team has filed preliminary paperwork for an injunction, but Judge Abernathy hasn't ruled yet. If we complete the transaction before any ruling, it becomes significantly harder to reverse, James finished. Exactly. Let's proceed. We took our seats as folders were distributed around the table. I noticed Richard watching me, something like wonder in his expression as I discussed contract particulars with James's legal team. This was a side of me he'd rarely seen, the businesswoman, the negotiator, the leader comfortable in rooms where millions changed hands. Halfway through reviewing the final documents, the conference room door opened. All heads turned as Douglas, Harrison Sr. strode in, flanked by 2 men in suits who radiated expensive legal education. His eyes swept the room, landing first on me with cold fury, then on Richard with something between shock and betrayal. This proceeding is illegitimate, he announced without preamble. I've filed an injunction challenging the validity of Blackstone's acquisition of Oceanic Holdings. Until that's resolved, no assets can be transferred. James Whitley leaned back in his chair, unruffled. Douglas, I was wondering when you'd join. Us? Have you met Judge Abernathy? Fascinating woman. Denied your request 20 minutes ago. Douglas's composure slipped momentarily. That's impossible. The filing was submitted and reviewed promptly, James cut in smoothly. Benefits of a clear-cut case. Your merger agreement with Blackstone was thoroughly vetted by both legal teams. Page 342, Clause 17B, specifically addressed the disposition of non-core real estate holdings, including Westridge. My attorneys will contest. Your attorneys drafted half the document, James pointed out. Now we're in the middle of a closing. You're welcome to stay as an observer, or you can wait outside. Those are your options. Douglas's face flushed dark red. For a moment I thought he might actually shout, something I'd never seen him do, in public, where appearances were everything. Instead, his gaze fixed on Richard. So this is where you've chosen to stand, he said, voice low and dangerous. Against your family, against your heritage. Richard straightened in his chair. I'm standing with my wife, he replied evenly. Supporting her business decision. Isn't that what you've always taught us about marriage, Dad? That we should be unified in our approach to, what did you call it? Building generational wealth? Muscle twitched in Douglas's jaw. This isn't about wealth. This is about loyalty. Yes, Richard agreed. It is. The simplicity of that response seemed to take Douglas aback. He'd come armed for a complex battle of legal maneuvers and emotional manipulation, not his son's quiet certainty. "Mr. Harrison?" James's attorney interjected. "We're proceeding with the closing. As I said, you're welcome to observe, but we will ask you to refrain from further interruptions." Douglas stood rigidly for several seconds, calculating his options. Finally, he nodded curtly and took a seat at the far end of the table, his attorneys flanking him like sentinels. The signing proceeded methodically, initials here, signatures there, a slow but inexorable transfer of a property that had been in the Harrison family for nearly a century. With each page, I felt Douglas's glare intensify, but I kept my focus on the documents before me. Richard, to my continued surprise, asked thoughtful questions about the terms, the timeline for taking possession, the structural assessment that had been part of the purchase agreement. Not once did he glance toward his father for approval or reaction. When the final signature was complete, James slid the deed across the table to me with a subtle nod of respect. "Congratulations, Cassandra. Westridge is now officially the property of Veterans Rebuild." I accepted the document, the weight of it in my hands representing far more than paper and ink. "Thank you, James. We'll make it something special." "I know you will," he replied. "That's precisely why I agreed to sell to you instead of the 3 developers who offered more." Douglas made a strangled sound from the end of the table. "You had other offers? Higher offers?" James turned to him with practiced civility. "Indeed." Blackstone received several bids after acquiring Oceanic. Most proposed tearing down the main house, subdividing the land, building luxury condos. "And you chose instead to sell to my daughter-in-law? At a discount?" The incredulity in Douglas's voice would have been comical if it weren't so revealing of his worldview, that profit should always trump purpose, that relationships existed only to serve financial gain. "I chose," James corrected, "to sell to a respected business leader with a clear vision for preserving the property while transforming it into something beneficial to the community. The fact that she happened to be your daughter-in-law was, frankly, irrelevant to my decision." Douglas pushed back from the table abruptly, chair legs scraping against the polished floor. "This isn't over," he said tersely. "Richard, we need to talk. Privately." Richard glanced at me, then back at his father. "Not today, Dad. I'm going with Cass to Westridge. We're meeting the renovation team for an initial assessment." The flash of genuine surprise on Douglas's face was almost worth the entire ordeal of the past 24 hours. In all their years of tense father-son dynamics, Richard had never directly refused a command from Douglas Harrison Sr. "You can't be serious," Douglas said, voice dropping dangerously low. "After everything I've done for you, after the opportunities I've given you, after bailing out that pathetic startup of yours when it failed." "That's enough," I interrupted, rising from my chair. "This is neither the time nor the place for family drama, Douglas. The transaction is complete. Westridge has a new owner and a new purpose. You're welcome to schedule a meeting with our team if you have legitimate business concerns, but this personal attack needs to stop." Douglas turned his fury toward me, but before he could speak, Richard stood as well. "She's right, Dad," he said, firmly. "It's done, and if you ever speak to my wife that way again, it won't just be Westridge you lose access to." The conference room fell silent. Even James's attorneys seemed frozen by the unexpected confrontation. Douglas stared at his son as though seeing a stranger. "You'd choose her over your family? Over your birthright?" Richard didn't hesitate. "I'm choosing integrity over intimidation, purpose over pretense. And if you can't see the difference, then that's your loss, not mine." He took my hand, a gesture so natural yet so profound in that moment. "We should go. The team is waiting." We left Douglas standing in the conference room, surrounded by lawyers who couldn't protect him from the one thing he truly feared. Irrelevance. In the elevator down to the parking garage, Richard leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. That was intense, I offered. Liberating, he corrected, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. I've spent my entire adult life dreading his disapproval, and now that I've faced it head-on, I realize it doesn't have the power I thought it did. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped out into the dim concrete expanse of the parking level. As we walked to our car, Richard's phone chimed with a text. He glanced at it, then showed me the screen. Vivian. Dad just called. Says you've chosen sides. Is it true? What are you going to tell her? I asked. Richard considered for a moment before typing a response. I've chosen truth. And a future built on something real. He hit send, then pocketed his phone. She won't understand. Not yet anyway. Does it matter? I asked as we reached the car. He thought about it as he slid into the passenger seat. A week ago it would have. Today, I'm not so sure. We drove across town toward Westridge, following the familiar route that had always led to Sunday brunches and holiday gatherings filled with subtle judgment and carefully maintained appearances. This time, our destination was the same, but our purpose entirely different. As we turned down the tree-lined drive, the mansion came into view, sprawling, elegant, and undeniably impressive with its columned facade and perfectly manicured grounds. But now, instead of seeing it through the lens of Harrison family pride, I saw it through the eyes of a builder, a visionary, a creator of spaces where healing could happen. It's beautiful, Richard murmured beside me. I never really looked at it before. Not properly. It will be even more beautiful, I replied, when it's full of purpose instead of pretense. A small convoy of vehicles was already parked in the circular drive. Marcus's truck, 2 vans from our architectural team, and a sedan I recognized as belonging to Elena, our program director. They'd been waiting for my text confirming the closing, before beginning their preliminary work. As we pulled in behind them, Marcus emerged from his truck, clipboard in hand, his face breaking into a wide grin when he spotted us. Boss! It's official! I held up the folder containing the deed. All signed. Westridge is ours. The team gathered around, a mix of veterans and civilians who had become the beating heart of veterans' rebuild over the years. Elena embraced me tightly. I can't believe we actually pulled this off, she whispered. When you first mentioned acquiring an estate for the training center, I thought you were dreaming big. I didn't realize you were dreaming Harrison big. I laughed, the sound startling, me with its lightness. Neither did they. Marcus gestured toward Richard with a questioning look. I nodded reassuringly. Everyone, you know my husband Richard. He's joining us today for the initial assessment. Richard stepped forward, extending his hand to Marcus with a directness I hadn't seen him use with my team before. I'm looking forward to seeing the plans, he said. Cass tells me you've got some innovative ideas for the East Wing. Marcus blinked in surprise before shaking Richard's hand firmly. Yes, sir. We're thinking of converting it into specialized workshops. Woodworking, metalcraft, digital fabrication. Veterans with different abilities will be able to train in trades that match their strengths. And the boathouse? Richard asked. Cass mentioned boat building? Elena nodded enthusiastically. Traditional wooden boat restoration. It's incredibly therapeutic work, detailed, meditative, but also physically engaging, and the skills are highly marketable. As the team led us toward the main house, I held back slightly, watching Richard engage with my colleagues with genuine interest. He asked thoughtful questions about program structure, funding models, placement rates for program graduates. Once did he glance around nervously as though expecting his father to appear. Not once did he diminish the vision with qualifiers about charity work or nice projects. When we reached the grand entrance, I removed the old key James had given me at the closing. It turned smoothly in the lock, the heavy door swinging open to reveal the soaring foyer I'd seen dozens of times before at Harrison gatherings. The team moved in, voices echoing in the empty space as they dispersed to begin measurements and assessments. Richard remained beside me in the doorway, taking in the space with new eyes. "I remember when I was 7, he said quietly. "My father brought me here for the first time. He told me that one day all of this would belong to me if I proved worthy of the Harrison name." I looked at him, really looked at the man who had stood up to his father, who had chosen to be here with me instead of retreating to the safety of family approval. "And now?" I asked. Richard smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Now it belongs to something better than a name. It belongs to a purpose." He took my hand as we stepped over the threshold together, into a future neither of us had imagined 24 hours earlier. One where legacy was measured not in generations past, but in lives transformed in generations to come. Behind us, the heavy door swung closed on old assumptions, old patterns, old ways of measuring worth. Ahead lay something I hadn't dared hope for in our marriage, a true partnership built on mutual respect and shared vision. Marcus approached with blueprints tucked under his arm. "Ready to get started, boss?" I glanced at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "Absolutely," I replied. "We have a lot of work to do." As the afternoon progressed, something remarkable happened. Richard didn't just observe, he participated. He shared insights about the property's unique features based on childhood explorations. He pointed out structural issues the Harrisons had ignored for years. He suggested ways to repurpose spaces while honoring their original character. Elena pulled me aside during a break, her expression curious. "So, this is new. Your husband seems really invested." "It surprised me too," I admitted. "But I think he's finally seeing what I've been building all these years." "And what you're capable of," she added with a knowing smile. "Nothing like buying your in-laws' mansion to make a statement." I laughed softly. That wasn't the primary motivation. "Maybe not consciously," she teased. "But you have to admit, there's a certain poetic justice to transforming the ultimate symbol of Harrison privilege into a haven for veterans they wouldn't deign to speak to at their charity galas." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text. Claire Harrison's name appeared on the screen, the last person I expected to hear from. "Are you at Westridge?" I hesitated before replying, "Yes," with the renovation team. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "May I stop by? Alone." I showed the message to Richard, who looked as surprised as I felt. "What do you think she wants?" "No idea," he replied. "But of all my family, she's the least likely to create a scene." I typed back, "Yes. We'll be here until 5. 20 minutes later, a sleek silver Mercedes pulled into the drive. Claire emerged, elegant as always in a cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored slacks. She hesitated when she saw the collection of trucks and vans, uncertainty flickering across her usually composed features. Richard and I met her on the front steps. "Mother," he greeted her, "this is unexpected." "For all of us, I think," she replied, her gaze moving between us before settling on me. "Douglas told me what happened at the closing." "Did he mention the part where he threatened legal action, or just the part where his son finally stood up to him?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. To my surprise, Claire's lips curved in a small smile. "Both, actually. Though his version was considerably less flattering to you two." She glanced at the open door behind us, where team members could be seen taking measurements and photographs. "Might we speak privately?" I led her to the solarium at the rear of the house, light-filled space overlooking the gardens where I'd always felt most comfortable during Harrison gatherings. It was the one room free of hunting trophies and ancestral portraits, with windows that opened to the world beyond the estate's carefully maintained boundaries. Claire settled onto a bench, her posture perfect as always. "So, you're really going through with this, turning Westridge into a facility for veterans." "A training and rehabilitation center," I confirmed. "Yes." She nodded slowly, her gaze drifting over the grounds visible through the windows. Douglas is beside himself. In 40 years of marriage, I've never seen him so undone. "I didn't do this to hurt him," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "This wasn't about revenge, wasn't it?" she asked, not unkindly. "Not even a little?" I considered her question carefully. The opportunity came first. The satisfaction. That was secondary. Claire's laugh was unexpected, a genuine sound I'd heard perhaps 3 times in all the years I'd known her. "Well played, Cassandra. Very well played indeed." Richard shifted. Beside me. "Mother, why are you here?" Claire's expression sobered. "2 reasons. First, to see for myself what's happening to Westridge. And second—" She hesitated, something vulnerable crossing her features. "To tell you that I understand more than you might think." "Understand what?" Richard asked. "What it's like to be measured against Harrison standards and found wanting," she said softly. "What it's like to have your accomplishments diminished because they don't align with Douglas's vision of success." I stared at her, this woman who had always seemed the perfect Harrison wife, poised, deferential, ornamental. "I don't understand." Claire straightened, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her slacks. "Before I married your father, Richard, I was finishing my doctorate in art history. I had a position lined up at the museum, a book contract, a future in academia." "You never told me that," Richard said, clearly stunned. "No," she agreed, "because by the time you were old enough to understand, I had become exactly what Douglas wanted, a wife who managed the household, hosted the right parties, supported his ambitions without having any of her own." She turned to me, her gaze direct. "I've watched you fight to maintain your identity, Cassandra, to build something meaningful despite my husband's dismissal. I admire it more than you know." The admission hung in the air between us, a connection I never expected to find with this woman who had sat through 5 years of Sunday brunches without ever challenging her husband's treatment of me. "Why tell us this now?" I asked. Claire looked out at the gardens again. "Because Westridge deserves to be more than a symbol of Harrison pride. It deserves to be useful, to have purpose." She paused, something resolute settling in her expression. "And because I want to help." "Help?" Richard repeated, clearly skeptical. "How?" "I have resources of my own," she said. "Family money that predates my marriage to your father. I'd like to establish a scholarship fund for veterans entering your program, particularly for women veterans who want to pursue further education alongside their technical training." I couldn't hide my shock. "Douglas would never approve." "Douglas doesn't need to know," Claire replied with a small, defiant smile. "At least not until it's established and operating. By then it will be too late for him to object without looking petty." The idea of Claire Harrison, perfect society wife, masterful hostess, upholder of family traditions, secretly funding scholarships for female veterans, was so unexpected I almost laughed. "Why women veterans specifically?" I asked instead. Claire's gaze met mine, steady and clear. "Because I know what it's like to set aside your own potential to meet others' expectations. I don't want another generation of women to make that choice, if they don't have to." In that moment, I saw Claire, really saw her, perhaps for the first time. Not as Mrs. Douglas Harrison Sr., but as a woman who had made compromises I was unwilling to make, who had surrendered ambitions I had fought to preserve. "I'd be honored to work with you on establishing that fund," I said sincerely. She nodded, something like relief crossing her features. "Good. I'll have my attorney contact you next week to begin arrangements." She glanced at her watch and rose gracefully. "I should go. Douglas thinks I'm at my book club." As we walked her back to her car, Claire paused to look up at the mansion's facade. You know, I never really loved this place, she admitted. Too many rooms that weren't lived in, too much space designed to impress rather than comfort. It won't be that way anymore, I promised. Every room will have purpose. Every space will support healing. Claire studied me for a moment, then surprised me by reaching out to squeeze my hand briefly. Good. That's as it should be. She turned to Richard. And you? Are you really all right with this transformation of your inheritance? Richard slipped his arm around my waist, the gesture natural and unforced. I'm more than all right with it, Mother. I'm proud to be part of it. Something softened in Claire's expression. Then perhaps Douglas's plan succeeded after all, just not in the way he intended. He always said he wanted Westridge to pass to the next generation of Harrisons who would honor its legacy. She smiled faintly. He just didn't specify which Harrison or what legacy. As her car disappeared down the tree-lined drive, Richard turned to me with wonder in his eyes. Did you know about my mother's academic background? I shook my head. She never mentioned it, not once in 5 years. I wonder what else I don't know, he mused. About her, about my father, about the stories I've been told my whole life. Maybe it's time to find out, I suggested. To see your family clearly, not just through the lens they've created. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back to the mansion where my team continued, their work, planning, and measuring for transformation. And maybe it's time they saw me clearly too, the man I actually am, not the son they expected me to be. I squeezed his hand, feeling for the first time in years that we might find our way back to being true partners rather than two people navigating the gravitational pull of the Harrison family expectations. Ready to go back in? I asked. Marcus wants to review the initial budget projections for the East Wing renovation. Richard smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. Lead the way. I believe I have some expertise to offer about the property's electrical systems. They've needed upgrading since I was a teenager. As we walked back toward the mansion, no longer a symbol of what I couldn't access, but a canvas for what we could create. I felt something shift between us. Not forgiveness, exactly, but possibility. The chance to build something new from the rubble of old assumptions and unspoken resentments. Behind us, the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns that would soon become training grounds and healing gardens. Ahead lay not just a renovation project, but perhaps the renovation of something even more complex and valuable. A marriage founded on mutual respect, rather than convenient compromise. You know, Richard said as we reached the front steps. My father always said legacy was about preserving what came before. I think he was wrong. Oh. I raised an eyebrow. Legacy isn't what you keep, he replied, his gaze moving over the mansion that would soon be transformed. It's what you build, and who you become in the building. 6 months passed like water flowing over stones, steady, transformative, unstoppable. Westridge evolved from a neglected symbol of status into a living, breathing center of purpose. The grand dining room where I'd endured countless dismissive brunches now housed long tables where veterans gathered for meals and mentorship. The stuffy drawing room had become a high-tech classroom. The private wine cellar had transformed into an art therapy studio. Spring sunshine filtered through newly installed skylights as I walked Marcus through the final punch list for the East Wing. Veterans in hard hats and work boots moved purposefully through the space, installing equipment, testing systems, preparing for next week's official opening. Solar installation is complete, Marcus confirmed, checking off an item. The system will cover about 70% of our energy needs. Perfect. I nodded. And the accessibility modifications? All done according to spec. Every area of the main building is now wheelchair accessible. The paths to the cottages will be finished tomorrow. I smiled, taking in the space that had once been the exclusive domain of Harrison family gatherings. "It's really happening. Did you ever doubt it would?" Marcus asked with a knowing grin. "Not the renovation," I clarified. "This." I gestured to the veterans working around us. Half our construction team came through our training program. 3 of them were homeless when we found them. Now they're certified tradespeople rebuilding their lives while they rebuild this place. Marcus squeezed my shoulder briefly. "That's all you, boss. Your vision." "Our vision," I corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Just got out of meeting. Headed your way. Big news." In the month since the closing, Richard had surprised me daily, showing up at Veterans Rebuild with ideas, connections, genuine interest. He'd resigned from his father's company 2 weeks after we acquired Westridge, taking a consulting position with a tech firm that allowed him flexible hours. 3 days a week, he worked alongside our team, learning the business from the ground up. Douglas hadn't spoken to him since the closing, maintaining a rigid silence that extended to family events. Vivian followed her father's lead, but Claire had quietly broken ranks. Her scholarship fund for women veterans was now fully established, providing educational support for 20 women in our first cohort. I found Richard in the entrance hall an hour later, deep in conversation with Elena about the upcoming opening gala. He looked up when I approached, his smile genuine and unguarded in a way it never had been during our visits to this house before. "There you are," he greeted me, leaning in for a quick kiss. "Wait until you hear what just happened." "Good news, I hope?" I asked, noting the excitement in his eyes. "Remember that federal contract we bid on? The one for transitional housing projects on decommissioned military bases?" My heart skipped. We'd submitted that bid 2 months ago, a massive proposal that would expand Veterans Rebuild's model nationwide. "We got it?" "Not only did we get it," Richard confirmed, his voice rising with excitement, "they specifically cited our work at Westridge as the deciding factor. They loved our integration of skills training with housing solutions." Elena squealed, throwing her arms around me. "That's a $40 million contract." 38.6, Richard corrected with the precision he'd brought to our financial projections. "But who's counting?" I laughed, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged foyer where Harrison family portraits had once hung. Now the walls displayed photographs of our program graduates, their faces radiating the pride of accomplishment and renewed purpose. "We need to tell the team," I said, already calculating how many additional veterans we could serve, how many more lives could be transformed. As if on cue, Marcus appeared at the top of the grand staircase. "Boss, tour groups here." Every Friday afternoon, we hosted potential partners and supporters, corporations considering hiring our graduates, philanthropists interested in funding expansion, military officials evaluating our model for replication. These tours had become crucial to our growth strategy, converting skeptics into advocates through the undeniable power of seeing our work firsthand. Richard and I moved toward the front door, where a small group waited. I recognized most of them: executives from a construction firm we'd been courting, a reporter from the Business Journal, a Veterans Affairs official from the governor's office. But the last figure, standing slightly apart from the others, froze me in my tracks. Douglas Harrison Sr. His posture was as rigid as ever, his suit as impeccable, but something in his face had changed. The imperious confidence had been replaced by something more complex, uncertainty perhaps, or reluctant curiosity. Richard tensed beside me. "Dad," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." Douglas adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture I'd never seen from him before. I received an invitation to the opening gala. It seemed prudent to see the facility beforehand. I exchanged glances with Richard, both of us knowing we hadn't sent that invitation. Claire's work, undoubtedly. "You're welcome to join the tour. I offered, maintaining professional courtesy despite the thunder of my heartbeat. We're showcasing the completed renovations and presenting our first-year outcomes. Douglas nodded stiffly. That would be acceptable. For the next hour, I led the group through Westridge, explaining our programs, introducing them to veterans and staff, demonstrating the transformation from mansion to mission. Throughout, Douglas remained silent, his expression unreadable as he observed spaces once reserved for Harrison family functions now vibrant with productive activity. In the boat-building workshop, formerly the boathouse where Vivian had hosted summer cocktail parties, a young woman with a prosthetic leg was meticulously sanding the hull of a nearly completed wooden skiff. Sophia was a Navy corpsman, I explained, to the group. She lost her leg in an IED blast in Syria. When she came to us, she was struggling with PTSD and couldn't maintain steady employment. Sophia looked up, nodding a greeting before returning to her careful work. Now she's not only mastering boat restoration, I continued, she's training to become an instructor in our program. The craftsmanship is exceptional, Douglas commented unexpectedly, studying the graceful lines of the boat. Sophia glanced up. Again. Would you like to see the interior joinery, sir? That's the real challenge with these vintage designs. To my astonishment, Douglas stepped forward, listening intently as Sophia explained the complex woodworking techniques she'd mastered. For a moment, his corporate persona slipped, revealing genuine appreciation for the skill involved. As the tour continued to the next station, Richard hung back beside me. Did my father just have a human moment? He whispered. I think he might have, I murmured back, equally stunned. When the formal tour concluded, most of the visitors departed for a scheduled reception in town. Douglas lingered, examining a wall, display showing before and after photographs of Westridge's transformation. Your operational model is interesting, he said finally, turning to face me. Self-sustaining rather than purely charitable. The contracts cover program costs while providing real-world training. That's right, I confirmed, surprised by his accurate assessment. We're not a charity. We're a social enterprise. He nodded slowly. Claire's scholarship program complements it well. So he knew about that. I wondered how that revelation had played out between them. It does, I agreed. Her focus on educational advancement for women veterans fills a gap in our model. Douglas shifted his weight slightly, the only outward sign of discomfort from a man who prided himself on perfect self-control. The property has been well utilized, he admitted, better than it had been for many years. Richard moved to stand beside me, our shoulders touching in silent solidarity. Thank you for saying that, Dad. Douglas looked at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in months or years. You seem different. I am, Richard acknowledged simply. A complex emotion crossed Douglas's face, something between reluctant respect and uncomfortable. Recognition. Vivian refuses to visit. She says it would be too painful to see the changes. And you? I asked quietly. I find I am... He paused, searching for the right word, revising certain assumptions. Coming from Douglas Harrison Sr., this was tantamount to a full apology and admission of error. Richard and I exchanged glances, both recognizing the significance of the moment. Would you like to see the heritage room? Richard offered. It was important to Cass that we preserve the history of Westridge while transforming its purpose. Douglas raised an eyebrow, surprised. You maintained a heritage room? I nodded. This property has a story worth telling, even as we write its next chapter. We led him to what had once been his private study. The hunting trophies and intimidating desk were gone, replaced by a thoughtfully curated exhibit about Westridge's history. Original architectural drawings, family photographs spanning decades, newspaper clippings about significant events hosted on the property, all carefully preserved and respectfully displayed. Douglas moved slowly around the room, pausing at a black and white photograph of his parents standing proudly on the front steps the day they purchased the estate in 1932. "You kept this," he said softly. "Of course," I replied. "It's part of the story we tell our veterans about this place. How it was built, who lived here, how it's evolving to serve a new purpose while honoring its past." He turned to face us, something shifting in his expression. Not warmth exactly. Douglas Harrison Sr. might never be capable of true warmth, but perhaps a grudging reassessment. "The opening gala," he said abruptly. "What are your fundraising targets?" Richard blinked, thrown by the sudden shift. $2 million. Why? "Harrison Developments will match donations up to $1 million, Douglas stated, as though announcing a routine business transaction. Anonymous matching donor. No public acknowledgement required. I stared at him, searching for the catch, the hidden agenda, the subtle power play. Finding none, I simply said, "Thank you. That will make a significant difference to our expansion plans." He gave a curt nod. "I should go. I have a dinner engagement." As we walked him to the front entrance, Douglas paused once more, looking up at the facade of the mansion that had been the crown jewel of his family's legacy. "When I first learned what you'd done," he said, not looking at either of us, "I was furious. I felt robbed, not just of property, but of something intangible." "Legacy," Richard supplied. "Yes." Douglas's mouth tightened. "But seeing it today, perhaps legacy isn't what I thought it was." With that cryptic statement, he departed, leaving Richard and I standing in the doorway of a building that had once represented everything that divided us, but now embodied what we were building together. "Did that really just happen?" Richard asked, watching his father's car disappear down the drive. "I think it did," I replied, equally stunned. "Though I'm not entirely sure what that was." Richard slipped his arm around my waist. "Progress, maybe, of a very Douglas Harrison sort." I leaned into him, allowing myself to acknowledge how far we'd come, not just with Westridge, but with each other. The wall between us had crumbled alongside the renovations, revealing a partnership stronger than the one we'd started with. "Speaking of progress," I said, turning toward him, "did you tell your father about our other news?" Richard shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. "I thought we agreed to wait until after the opening." "I know, but given today's unexpected visit," he laughed, resting his hand gently on my still flat stomach. "Let's keep some news just for us, at least for a little while longer. This baby is ours first, before it becomes another branch on the Harrison family tree." I covered his hand with mine, thinking about the future we were building. A child who would never know Westridge as a symbol of exclusivity and privilege, but as a place of healing and purpose. "Speaking of trees," I said, "the landscaping team finished planting the memorial grove yesterday. Want to see?" Hand in hand, we walked toward the eastern edge of the property, where a grove of young oak trees now stood in formation, each one planted in honor of a fallen service member. Simple stone markers at the base of each tree bore names, dates, and branches of service. A living memorial that would grow alongside our program. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the newly planted grove, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From the dismissive Sunday brunches to this moment of quiet pride, from a marriage strained by unspoken resentments to a partnership strengthened by shared purpose. "It's beautiful," Richard said, surveying the grove. "Just like everything else you've built here." "We built," I corrected gently. "I may have bought Westridge, but what it's becoming, that's a creation we're shaping together." He smiled, drawing me closer as we looked out over the property that had once been a symbol of everything I couldn't access, and now represented everything we could create. "You know," Richard said thoughtfully, "my father always said that legacy was about preserving what came before. about maintaining traditions simply because they were traditions. And now? Now I think legacy is something we build forward, not backward. It's about what we create that outlasts us, what gives others a foundation to build upon. I smiled, thinking of all the lives that would be transformed within these walls in the years to come. The veterans who would find purpose and community. The families who would heal together. The child we would raise to understand that true worth isn't measured in family names or exclusive addresses, but in the impact you make on the lives around you. I think that's a legacy worth building, I said softly. As the light faded and the first stars appeared above us, we turned back toward the mansion. Windows glowed warmly against the gathering darkness. Voices and laughter drifted from the cottages, where the first cohort of veterans and their families now lived. A home no longer defined by who it excluded, but by who it embraced. If my story has touched something in you, if you've ever been underestimated or dismissed, know this. Your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see your potential. It's measured by the vision you hold for yourself and the purpose that drives you forward. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places and building meaningful legacies that transform lives. Because sometimes the most powerful response to those who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong. It's creating something so right that it changes the very metrics by which value is measured. Remember, it's not about revenge. It's about revision, rewriting. The stories others have tried to write for us, and creating new narratives built on purpose rather than pretense.